What's going on, everyone? With Smite 2 Alpha recently released, along with the patch notes that they gave, I thought it'd be a good idea to go over 5 important changes and mechanics coming to Smite 2 as well as the Alpha. So let's go ahead and get started. But before we get into it, I want to go over some important changes that you may already know about, but would feel remiss to not talk about. So some big changes that are coming to Smite 2 is that all gods can now build any item. So Crit Ymir, for example, is now possible. Magical and physical damage has been changed, is now more broadly differentiated by strength and intelligence. And to make things simple, strength is practically the same as physical damage, and intelligence is practically magical damage. From my understanding, your god's abilities scale off of intelligence and strength, which allow you to do physical and magical damage. However, because every god can now build every item, you'll need to pay attention to which specific abilities on your god have strength or intelligence, or even both of each type of scaling, and determine what type of items you want to build based off that. Strength usually aligns with basic attack damage and ability damage, while intelligence aligns with ability damage and ability utility effects. Another thing to keep in mind is that most abilities have both strength and intelligence scaling, meaning you're doing magical and physical damage with that ability, which is why it's important to figure out what type of build you want to create, as strength and intelligence scaling give your god different effects. So the ball is in your court with how you want to build your god. And those are some of the main and obvious changes coming to Smite 2. I'm assuming most of you have heard of it, but with that out of the way, let's dive into the first change, and that has to deal with the cooldown system. So if you were here before with Smite 1, you'll know that the cooldown system was based on percentages, where each item that had cooldown either gave you 10 to 20% cooldown, with the max being 40%, or 50% if you did buy Sphinx's baubles. However, in Smite 2, this is no longer the case. Cooldown percent reduction has been changed to flat cooldown rate. It is a little bit confusing compared to the old system, but with this new system, it does allow for building more cooldown items without having it feel like a wasted stat, as cooldown is now uncapped with diminishing returns. The formula to figure out how much cooldown you're going to be getting from an item is 100 divided by 100 plus x, with those being in parentheses, where x represents how much cooldown you have. So for example, in Smite 2, if you have 10 cooldown, it'll roughly equate to 9% cooldown. 25 cooldown gives you 20% cooldown, 45 cooldown gives you basically 30% cooldown, 65 cooldown gives you 40% cooldown, and 100 gives you 50% cooldown. So you can see the diminishing returns you get when you build a lot of cooldown in Smite 2. And the second change coming to Smite 2 is lifesteal. In Smite 1, lifesteal was based on magical and physical, and they both had separate and different caps. But now lifesteal is becoming one holistic stat, where it's all damage dealt, whether it's physical, magical, basic attack, or ability damage. However, very similarly to Smite 1, lifesteal only has a 33% effectiveness against minions, jungle camps, and bosses, whereas there is a 100% effectiveness to gods. So that Smite 1 mechanic will still transfer over to Smite 2. So for example, if you have 30% lifesteal, 30% of damage dealt to gods will be healed, while if you damage a minion, for example, only 10% of the damage will be healed back to you. However, the main thing to take away is the one holistic lifesteal stat coming to Smite 2 rather than the differentiated physical and magical lifesteal in Smite 1. Coming up with number 3 is the penetration changes coming to Smite 2. In Smite 1, there were 2 types of penetration, where one is flat pen reduction, basically in its name reducing the protections against an enemy by a flat number. And this usually helped to kill gods that didn't build a lot of protections like mages and hunters. And the second type of penetration is percent pen, where it takes a percent of the enemy's protections away, which usually corresponded with doing more damage to tanks. Well, in Smite 2, flat penetration is no longer in the game, and they don't plan on reintroducing it. However, items like percent pen and health damage related items will still be in the game. So items in Smite 1 like Jotun's Wrath or Spear of Desolation will not exist with that flat pen stat, whereas items with passives like Heartseeker and Kins will still be in the game. One thing to mention is that although flat pen is no longer in the game, there will be items that act as flat pen, For example, with the new Titan's Bane item and the Stone of Binding item that gives flat pen essentially. This also goes for other items like Smite 1's Executioner, which doesn't give percent pen per se, but its passive essentially gives you a variation of percent pen. But again, the main takeaway is that flat pen in Smite 2 is no longer a thing. Next up with number 4, we have some changes to CC or crowd control descriptions for quality of life and clarity's sake. So in Smite 1, there is a type of CC known as knockback, which encapsulates knockbacks, knockups, pushes, pulls, and grabs. So yeah, it's pretty redundant and hard to understand when you use an umbrella term for something that has the exact same type of CC underneath it, which is kind of weird. Now in Smite 2, all of these types of CCs will be classified as displacements, making it way more in line with describing this type of CC. Additionally, they're adding a new type of CC classification known as impede CC, which will describe player-made objects that impede on players, so your mirror wall, cabal, and things of that nature. Similarly, they're adding impediment immunity, which describes abilities that can basically phase through these player-made walls, like a Vimana ult or Ganesh's third ability. So instead of the umbrella term known as knockbacks encapsulating all of the other types of CC I stated earlier in Smite 1, in Smite 2 it is now a more clear term known as displacement. Finally, the last change we have is to the god classes. In Smite 1 we have had 5 god classes differentiated from physical and magical, with assassins, warriors, and hunters being physical, while guardians and mages were magical. Well, in Smite 2 there are no longer god classes anymore. Now they're being differentiated by range versus melee attacks, and a multitude of other stats like basic attack and ability damage, defenses, strength aptitude, intelligence aptitude, and playstyle tags. And here is a visual of how Bellona, who was originally a physical warrior, will be in Smite 2 for example. If you played Smite 1 and know how every god generally plays, then you should be good to go. But by getting rid of the class differentiation for Smite 2, this allows for a more broad range of playability in different roles. For example, in Smite 1, mages were synonymous with the mid role. So basically, god classes won't be synonymous with a specific role, especially seeing as every god can build every item, so it only makes sense to change the god classes. Now there are a lot more changes coming to Smite 2. For example, a lot of the gods' kits are changing individually. So if you'd like to see a breakdown comparison between Smite 1 and Smite 2 gods, then let me know. But those were 5 important changes in mechanics that are coming to Smite 2. If you enjoyed the video, please like, comment, and subscribe. It goes a long way. Join the Discord in the description, and I do have memberships open if you'd like to support me. Let me know if you have any suggestions or feedback in the comment section down below. But with that being said, thank you guys for watching.